Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to continue our little series looking at Mark chapter 4, specifically the parable of the sower. Last week we looked at that first soil that the seed hit and what that kind of meant about our faith. I'm hoping as we look through each specific soil and what each the seed does or the word does in each specific soil, we can take a hard look at where we are, what soil we are, how we're receiving the word or receiving the gospel, and maybe take an opportunity to see if we're actually believers and see if the Lord has really planted the word in our soul and in our heart, and we're seeing fruit grow. So this week we're going to look at the second seed, or the second soil, same seed, second soil, and where that seed kind of lands and the result and why that happens. So if you look at Mark chapter 4, verse 5, that's the seed, the soil we're going to look at. It says this, it says, "Other seed fell on rocky ground, where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up, since it had no depth of soil." And this is verse 6. "And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away." And then Jesus goes on later in the passage to try and describe or explain that. And he says, in verses 16, he says, "And these are the ones sown on rocky ground, the ones who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy." And check this, "And they have no root in themselves, but endure for a while. Then, when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately they fall away." And so what he does here is he kind of gives us a second scenario. And that second scenario is what happens when soil is planted, or when seeds are planted in soil that is rocky or not forgiving or giving to deep, long, sustainable roots. So I'm a little bit of a gardener, so I kind of get this. When you're a gardener in the state of Georgia, what you ultimately have to deal with is the fact that most of the soil has like this red Georgia clay in it. And the bare minimum, if it's not on the top, like as you dig, you're going to find it. And so any vegetable you're trying to plant that's a root vegetable, a potato, a carrot, or any vegetables that need deep roots to sustain are going to have an issue. So I planted sweet potatoes for the first time this last fall, or this last spring. And the sweet potato would go down and it would meet that red dirt and couldn't go anywhere. And so instead of like trying to push down, it would just grow sideways. And so I pulled sweet potatoes up that came out in these big spiral circle looking things because it had just grown sideways because it couldn't get deep. That's the seed we're talking about here, in the soil we're talking about. It hits ground that is rocky. They can't grow deep roots. They can't grow roots that will sustain them for long periods of time. And I think the analogy there is obviously that it's people who hear and receive the word and yet have nothing that grounds them in their faith. So their faith is actually superficial and probably not there at all. I know this was the case for me. 7th grade, 10th grade, senior year, heard the gospel, saw friends respond to the gospel. Was, man, they're doing it, I'm doing it. Excited, get up, go do the whole like stand up, walk down the aisle thing, receive the gospel. And yet the next day or the next week when life began to push and pull at me, I was just done. Nothing changed in my life. There was no fruit. I would have said I was a Christian, and yet there was no roots in who I was. What I was missing, as we'll get to in a second, was discipleship. What Jesus says is that ultimately these seeds spring up really quick. And so the Greek word for spring up there implies some immediacy. Like it implies like a quickness. They came up quickly and it with a hurried nature. So this is the type of people that you see hear the gospel like me and just like, man, on fire, ready, 3, 2, 1, go, without any real root of what the gospel is, really real root of who Jesus is, really no real understanding of what Christ has done for them or who they once were. There's no real understanding and knowledge of the gospel. And so in many ways, what Jesus is trying to say here is there's no real transformation. There's no fruit, so to speak, that would attest to them being saved. And so one of the commentators, I'm going to read this to you. One of the commentators that I was reading about on this particular topic said this. He says, when you think about this scenario, Jesus is teaching a group of people, right? He's teaching people who are following him everywhere. And he says this seed, the seed that like immediately gets excited about the gospel, gets excited about Jesus, gets excited about what he's doing, and starts following. He says, think of the fickle crowds who follow Jesus. He's explaining that these people that would grow up and not have roots. He said, think of the fickle crowds who follow Jesus for the miracles and the free meals, but want no part in self-sacrifice or discipleship. What he says is they're excited but not devoted. They're all about who Jesus is, but they're not invested in their faith. They're all about watching him do cool things, getting the bread, hanging out, being a part of this new movement, and yet There's no sacrifice. There's no taking up their cross. There's no giving of themselves that would imply or show fruit, right? And the interesting thing to me is that at the end of verse 17, it talks about these believers or these not believers, however you kind of land on this passage. I would say not believers. These people receiving the word, and it says, and they immediately fell away. That falling away implies sort of a repelling, like they're repelled from the gospel. They're repelled from the word, from the soil, and that implies there that there is actual no faith. That it proves that their profession of faith, that I'm a Christian, what I did in 7th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, actually isn't true at all. That there's no actual root of their faith. And when there's no fruit, or there's no root, there's no fruit. And if there's no fruit, there's no faith. Right? Hear that? No root, no fruit. No fruit, no faith. Right? The number one way I can tell that somebody has true, genuine faith is I begin to see change in their life and the fruit of faith shows up. Right? They begin to grow sanctification. They begin to grow in their holiness. And so what this soil is missing, really simply put, is discipleship. Right? What it's missing is somebody who, like me as a 7th grader, me as a 10th grader, and a 12th grader, somebody to come alongside me and say, hey, you said this. Let's walk through what that means and looks like practically in your life. And I think what would have happened is I would have gone, yeah, I'm not ready to do that, or no, I'm not in for that at all. And no, you say I've got to stop doing these things and start walking like this, and I'm out. Right? I think I would have admitted, or maybe God would have used that person, and I'd have said, yeah, I'm in 100%, started reading my Bible, started praying, started doing things that were indicative of a Christian life that would have grown me closer to the Lord. I don't know what would have happened, but that didn't happen. I was missing the follow-through, the follow-up on a profession of faith. I was missing discipleship. I was missing somebody to help grow roots, right? And that's our problem, I think, especially in sort of a post-Christian culture that we see all over, especially the United States. People who are saying they're Christian but with no real roots, their lives don't look anything like Christianity, yet they would call themselves Christian. What you're missing is people that are rooted in Christ, rooted in the Word. That this was me in 7th, 10th, 12th grade, and many times still in my life, finding myself rooted in other things. It's not, you can't, what this parable is saying about this specific soil is that those that are rooted in the environment of their church, they're rooted in the community or their small groups or their worship music or their really cool environment and trendy church, like those roots are going to fail you. And that's what you're excited about. Like these people were excited about Jesus doing a miracle, excited about Jesus turning water into wine, like excited about him mainly because of the cool tricks he did or the miracles he did, not excited about who he was as the sacrifice, this true sacrificial lamb that was coming for their sin. They were excited about ancillary things. They're excited about the cool worship leader they had at their church. They're excited about the small group that gets to meet on Friday nights, and that's the content of their faith. What Hebrews 12:2 would say is like, put your eyes on Jesus, man. Like, put your eyes on Christ and look at him, the author and perfecter of your faith. Or Ephesians 2:20, it's like, Christ needs to be your cornerstone. He doesn't need to be just a cool a magician that you believe in and that you tack on your Instagram page, right? What this seed was missing, or this soil was missing, and therefore this seed, was roots in Jesus. It was missing an opportunity, or that it was missing the reality to root themselves in the fact that they're sinful, right? This was me in 7th grade. Root myself in the fact that I'm a sinful person in need of saving, that Christ came and died for that salvation, and that by believing in him, I had life. I was rooted in a popular movement by my friends. I was rooted in a church that kind of did things differently, that seemed cool. I was rooted in a lot of other things, but I wasn't rooted in the gospel. And this seed certainly isn't rooted in the gospel. And when hard things happen, right, when that popular church or that popular crowd or that movement that you're a part of changes and shifts, so goes their faith. And so that's what happens here. Is the sun, as the analogy, is something that's different or hard, right? When hard things happen or when something changes in this seed's life, there goes their faith. They, quote unquote, fall away. They move away from the gospel because they were never rooted in it to begin with. So my hope, my prayer for you is analyze, where are you? Do you have roots? Are you being discipled? Are you deepening your faith because you desire Jesus? Or are you simply shallow in your rootedness and certain things change in your life, or you move away from a church, or you move away from a community group? Is your faith going to fall apart? Which seed are you? Next week, guys.